Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Kari and today I'm doing my August wrap-up. Excluding the Booktubeathon, which happened the last 2 days of July and the first 5 days of August, I read 12 books somehow. It is still a miracle to me as well, but I'm not going to go through the books I read during Booktubeathon because I've already done a wrap-up, which I will leave linked down below if you want to check out. However, like I said, I did read 12 books, so let's get into those. The first one is Crazy Rich Asians, which I don't have the physical copy of right now because I lent it to a friend. And this is by Kevin Kwan about an American-born Chinese woman named Rachel whose boyfriend invites her to go to Singapore for the summer with him and meet his family, go to his best friend's wedding, etc. The movie just came out and I have to say the movie is fantastic. The book is much more in-depth as it can be, seeing as you have 500 pages as opposed to 2 hours. But I gave the book a 4 out of 5 stars. There were some just grating moments for me when the old rich Singaporean women were just so judgmental. And I don't know if it's just a thing when people get older, but it made me cringe. Overall though, it was still a really good book and I highly recommend the movie as well. The next one was one I listened to on audiobook, which was The Essex Serpent. Did not really enjoy this book. I gave it a 3 out of 5. It's about a woman and her son who go to this little village and suddenly they think that there's a serpent there. Hearing that the serpent might be there affects everybody in the village, and it was interesting enough anyway to see how the serpent, or the belief of the serpent rather, affected everybody in the village. However, it was just so slow and so boring. I didn't see any character development. In the book's defense, part of it might have been that the narrator was just not my friend at all. She speaks so slowly and so quietly that I had to crank my speakers up to the highest level they would go to be able to hear her at the end of the sentence when her voice naturally went down, which is fine because most of our voices naturally go down as an inflection thing. But hers just went down to such a level that I couldn't hear the end of the sentences. Between those two things and the fact that multiple sentences and phrases repeated themselves beyond often in this book, it felt overdone. It felt like you could have gotten through the principle and the themes and the action in the book in maybe 200 pages as opposed to the however many pages it was. And I really didn't enjoy it. The other one I listened to on audiobook is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I am rereading Harry Potter via audiobook this year. I'm not really sure why. My dad said that the audiobooks were good and I had Audible, a free trial coming to me, so I decided to start Harry Potter that way, and then I sort of got addicted to Harry Potter audiobooks. They're just so good, so now I have all of them. But I gave this one a 5 out of 5. 1, it's Harry Potter. 2, Jim Dale as the narrator does a phenomenal job. His voices are fantastic and incredibly distinct. You can hear him, and he speaks at a good pace. I really enjoyed it, and I am now currently listening to The Order of the Phoenix. I also read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen this month. I gave Pride and Prejudice 4 out of 5 stars. It is a classic about a young woman and her family who meet these two very well-to-do men in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and at that time women were supposed to get married, have kids, and die, in that order. So it's these young women's story of doing that, how they catch their men, so to speak, and I really enjoyed it. It was much closer to the movie than I thought, or rather the movie was closer to the book than I thought it was going to be. It was much more modern written than I expected as well, which made it significantly easier to read through, and I enjoyed catching the hints of humor, and every time Elizabeth would needle Darcy, I thought it was hysterical because I can imagine her saying it with a straight face and then him trying to figure out if she's insulted him or not. It was a really fun book, and I think one of the easier classics to read as well. I also read Arusha and the End of Time by Roshni Chokshi. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. This is a middle grade about a young girl who is told never to light this lamp in the museum that her mother curates. However, Aru goes to a school where all the other kids are rich and spoiled, so they go off to their second house in France for the summer or whatever, and she lies to fit in with them. They catch her in a lie and dare her to light the lamp. So, obviously she does, and a god or a demon comes out, I don't remember which. But at any rate, something comes out of this lamp, and if she doesn't stop that something, the world will end. It was really fun to read this. It's very Percy Jackson-esque, which makes sense since it's Rick Riordan Presents publishing. And the writing was good. There was less character development than I would have liked. It felt almost two-dimensional as far as Aru went. She did change, and you could see that. I just would have liked a little bit more introspection or demonstration of the change more gradually. The modern culture references are fantastic. My favorite was about a certain orange scaly demon who got elected to office. That made me laugh so hard. I loved it. I also read the Memoirs of Cleopatra by Margaret George. I did do a review for this one because it's just such a big book, and I had a fair amount of thoughts on it, so I will leave that link down below as well. This is a fictional account of Cleopatra VII, the last of the Ptolemy pharaohs. It takes place at the time of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, 30 BC or so, and I liked it overall. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I think the descriptions are beautiful. I loved all of her trips. The pacing was the biggest problem for me. There were parts that should have been slowed down, and many parts that should have been sped up and didn't need quite as much detail as Margaret George put in there. However, like I said, I think this is a really good overall view of Cleopatra, and it really gets you into the head of a woman about whom we know very little. I also read The High Mountains of Portugal by Jan Martel, who also wrote Life of Pi. This book follows 3 different men as they go up into the high mountains of Portugal, mountains being a relative term, and they each are alive during a different period. The first one is during the year of 1904, the second one is 35 years later, so 1939, and the last one, oh geez, and the last one is 1989. Sorry, I had to do math. 35 years on, 50 years after that. It's ridiculous. Anyway, each of these men has their own very distinct story, and they all interweave at the end, but this was a strange book to read. I gave it 3 out of 5, and maybe there's a message in here that I don't get or don't have the key to interpret. I don't know. It was an enjoyable book as far as the writing, and I think my favorite story was probably the third one, the 1989 one, because he lives with a chimp. So that was just very different and kind of fun to see him and the chimp living together. But they were all very different and not at all what I expected. I also read Martin Luther's 95 Theses. I had finished Calvin, which I'll get to in a minute, and decided that I wanted to see what Luther thought. What I didn't realize until I read this book, which I think I gave a 3 out of 5 stars because it's theology, so it's a little bit dense, but this was really short and I found it interesting nonetheless. Back to my original point, what I didn't realize was that these 95 Theses are primarily about one specific problem in the Catholic Church. He doesn't broadly criticize the Catholic Church in this. It takes him a while to get to the point where he sort of creates Lutheranism as we know it today. I found that very interesting because, having not studied theology in any shape, I assumed naively that Luther's 95 Theses would be about all of the problems of the church that he thought, such as there being 7 sacraments, or indulgences, excommunication, priests, that kind of thing. But he actually agreed with the papacy in general, just not certain specific things in it. I think indulgences was a really big one. So that was interesting, and I'm actually looking forward to reading some of his later works and following the thread of his thoughts. I read The Institutes of Christian Religion by John Calvin. This is obviously a reprint of his 1541 book of the same name. It is also a bit of a monster, so if you are really interested in theology, this is a great book. It explains Calvinism in a lot of depth, and I am significantly less angry at Predestination than I was before. I do still think Calvin maybe is a little bit wordy, but I gave this book a 4 out of 5 because it's so in-depth and such a good explanation, and I love the number of examples he uses. He quotes scripture like he's, oh my goodness, it's amazing. But at the same time, sometimes he just became overly verbose, and I wanted him to shut up and get to the point. 800 pages later, we finally got there, and I did enjoy my read of this because it helped me to understand a little bit more about where Protestantism and Catholicism differ without knowing that one of them follows the Pope and one of them doesn't. I then read House on Hackman's Hill by Joan Lowry Nixon. Read this one in 5th grade and it scared me senseless and gave me nightmares for a week. I wanted to reread it as a 25-year-old and see if it still did that. Good news, it didn't. I slept that night. This is a book about 2 kids who go into this house that is allegedly haunted by a mummy. It's a really atmospheric book, and I can understand why 10-year-old me was terrified, because it definitely gives you scary Halloween vibes. But it's also just a really fun middle grade, elementary grade read if you are into that. Then I read Flamecaster by Cinda Williams-Chima. I read this in one sitting because, well, why not? And this is a continuation of the Seven Realms series, but it's the start of the Shattered Realms series, which is a generation on or something. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 as well. I love Cinda Williams-Chima's books. Just in general, I've read The Warrior Heir in that series, and obviously the Seven Realms series, because this one would make a lot of sense without it. But this one just felt a little bit overly long and maybe less connected to the Seven Realms series than I would like. That said, I did really love watching the characters as they tried to manipulate their way around and how each of them went about it. One of my favorite parts about this book was something that is such a massive spoiler that I can't say anything, and it's driving me nuts. But I am so excited to finish the rest of this series, and I own them, so I'm going to get to them in September. Oh my goodness. The last 2 books are my favorite 2 books that I read all month. The first one is Molokai by Alan Brennert, my apologies. This follows a young girl, Rachel, in 1891-93 in Hawaii. She's living with her family on Maui or Oahu, I don't remember which, but she's living with her family in the islands, and all of a sudden she has these little rose-colored spots on her, and her mom tries to hide them, but eventually they find out that she's got leprosy. And so she is sent to Molokai, which is the leper colony at the time. This young girl is 7 at the beginning of the story, and you follow her throughout her life as she deals with leprosy and the ramifications of it. I did not expect to like this book so much. It's historical fiction, it's about Hawaii, about Molokai, which I knew very little about. And this book, oh my goodness. I don't cry during books, and I didn't cry during this one, but I choked up, which is saying something. It is so heartwarming and heart-wrenching, and the characters have such amazing friendships. It discusses everything from parents to childhood to sex to religion, everything. It is amazing, 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 and I cannot say enough good about this book, ever. This was 5 out of 5, clearly, and I am so glad that I finally got to this book, because I think it might be one of my favorites of the year. And the last book I read, which also happily got me to my Goodreads goal of reading 100 in a year, is The Life of Elizabeth by Alison Ware. This book, it's a tie actually between Molokai and Life of Elizabeth for my favorite book of the month, because this book is a biography of Elizabeth I, who you all know I am obsessed with. It doesn't talk about her childhood or her life through her brother's or her sister's reigns, but it starts in 1558 when she becomes queen on the death of her sister Mary. There are so many more details in this than I could have ever dreamed. At the same time, there were details that I know about her life that were missing, such as the fact that she met with Grace O'Malley, the infamous Irish pirate, and that was not included in here at all. But her relationship with her cousin Mary Queen of Scots was included, and all of the plotting that Mary did. Ugh, Mary, just don't get me started. And her relationship with Cecil Lord Burleigh, and then with his son, her relationship with Robin or Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, and his wife and then second wife, that's a whole mess. This was so much fun to read and such a pleasure, because it took me back to Elizabeth and taught me things that I didn't know while refreshing the things that I did. To do speech and debate in high school, and I was in the category of original oratory, where you had to write a speech and then perform it at the competitions. And my first year of speech, I did one on Elizabeth I, obviously. Many of the quotes I used in my speech, actually all of the quotes I used in that speech, ended up, or more specifically, are in this book. And I loved being able to go through this book and point out, oh yeah, I used that quote, and that quote, I remember that quote, oh I love this speech. It's amazing. The other best part of this, just the entire thing is good, is the number of quotes that Alison Ware used. She included several of Elizabeth's speeches in their entirety, such as her Armada speech, which is world famous, and then just included quotes from her courtiers or contemporary chroniclers or Elizabeth's biographer Camden, who wrote about Elizabeth in the early 1600s, and then many quotes obviously from Elizabeth herself. I cannot say enough good about this book either. If you are at all interested in the Tudors or Elizabeth, this is a must read. So those are all of the books I've read. Like I said, I'm not sure how that happened in August, but somehow I read 12, excepting the ones I read for Booktubeathon, which I think brings it up to 16-ish. We're gonna go with that. But at any rate, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a big thumbs up down below, subscribe button, and if you want to check out my Goodreads, I'll leave that linked down below as well. Until my next video, bye!